Let's start with setting a foundation. So,
Mhm.
what do you consider good songwriting or the elements encompassing?
I don't. I mean, this is why, in the first place, it almost seems. It's funny because I feel like there's so many different versions of what good songwriting is. I mean, it depends on. I don't know. There's just so many versions of that. Um, I mean, there's something like classic, country songwriting, like a Hank Williams tune or something. It's like a very specific, very narrative, kind of simple, get to the point kind of writing. Which I think for some people that's like the pinnacle of writing, and then there's you can go all the way. I don't know if you consider like what Mark Hollis does songwriting, but that is like
Mhm.
a far other pole in popular music of how to approach music and song within what you're doing.
Mhm.
I don't know. I feel like I don't have a single answer to that, I guess. And I think I would say I came to music not purely out of an interest in songwriting. I came to it more as a player and as a kind of just as an enthusiast before I ever had any idea of making music or making songs. So, I mean, I guess that's the thing. Like from the outset, like I just don't really think of music purely in terms of songwriting, and I don't even. A lot of the times, I don't even personally think of myself as a songwriter or even of that as being my strength. I think a lot of people probably would agree that I'm not like a great songwriter. Like that's not really my angle. I don't know that it ever has been.
I mean, you have mentioned that you didn't get serious about songwriting or guitar playing till later on in life. So, as you just stated, previous to that, it played a role of being enthusiastic about it. But was there, were there, would you still practice? Would you still were there still elements to songwriting that you engaged you prior to it being a career?
Um, I mean, before music was any kind of career, it was, I came to music as a kid when I was around 10 or 11, kind of just something I discovered that I was pretty good at it. Like I was pretty good at playing the guitar. Um, and I was an avid listener of a lot of music my parents played me and my older brother played me, but it was mostly like jazz and classical and stuff like that. So, I mean, that was where I came from initially. And it was not something I ever conceived of as like, I want to learn this and I want to be I want to be a professional musician or I want to be a songwriter or anything like that. It was kind of something that I just discovered that I could be good at, and it was almost like a way out of kind of mediocrity.
Yeah.
Honestly, like I wasn't really very. I was not much of a star student when I was really young. I was kind of awkward. I was kind of struggling a lot as a kid, and music was like something that proved that I could be good at anything. And it was more like a way to engage with other parts of life and like apply myself more in school and kind of not feel like a total waste of a kid. So like that, I mean, in some ways it had a real function early on as like, this is something I can do, it's something I can be good at. And I didn't really come to songwriting until I was maybe 19 or 20 years old. Um, and it was something I just kind of started doing. It was almost in just like a cathartic way. It was a way to connect with people. Um, and again, even then, it was not like I'm doing this because I want to be in a band and I want to make this happen. It was just like I feel compelled to make these things and I will share them with my friends.
Hmm.
And I was lucky enough to have friends that were also musically inclined and ended up being my bandmates, and it just kind of worked out. I lucked into the career that I had, I would say. Um, but anyway, I guess getting off track here, but I just sort of feel like music just kind of, yeah, it had like an emotional function before it was anything about craft or admiration of songwriting or what's the right way to do it. And
Hmm.
I didn't think about any of those things really when I was younger.
I read that at one point you were quote unquote obsessed for about a year or two trying to rip off Riverman or From the Morning from by Nick
Oh
Drake.
yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he was certainly like when I was a teenager, or late in my teenage years, like discovering Nick Drake's. First of all, you know, the strange tunings that he used. That was interesting to me because I liked the idea of getting away from what I knew intuitively to play on the guitar. Like if you just tune it in some bizarre way, you don't know where you are anymore, and you're kind of navigating blind and navigating just by shapes and what you hear. I kind of loved that about it. But yeah, no, his obviously that music was a huge deal to me when I was a kid, and there was some kind of, you know, there's something sort of mystical in his music that
Definitely.
struck a chord with a lot of people. Obviously, it still does. Same with like, you know, an Elliott Smith or something like that. Yeah, I mean, certainly ripping off the things that I loved when I was a teenager was that was a bit of an exercise. If anything was an exercise, that was an
Yeah.
exercise. Like, how do I just imitate exactly the thing that I love? And I'm sure a lot of people do that. And if you're lucky, I guess when you're imitating something, your own character comes out through that imitation and then just becomes something else. And I think, yeah, slowly over time, I think I got past that. But definitely have a couple songs from my college years that are embarrassingly like just pure like Elliott Smith.
What elements are you trying to absorb when you're trying to like take from a song? Is it the progression? Is it like, you know, on Riverman he goes from a major A add 9, and then on the verse he changes it to minor and then lands on that home F note. So it's like, is that what captures you? Like, how does he, the movements, or I guess again just the basic question, like what are you trying to absorb from it in your own songs when you're doing
You know, I have at this point it's hard to really I haven't really thought about writing in that way since I was a kid, but I guess, I mean, certainly tension between switching between major and minor, which is something, you know, at that same time when I was about 18, 19, that's like 2000, 2001. That's the same time that like Radiohead was a huge deal.
that?
They did a ton of that kind of thing where you're like switching between these modes in this amorphous way. And I thought there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that in Nick Drake tunes as well. I don't know. There's a tension there that's like, it's uncomfortable
Yeah.
in a way that I enjoyed, I guess. And I don't know. I think it's just, it's hard to know what you're trying to take from those things. I think you just, I guess if anything, all I was doing was like imitating certain chord shapes or something. And then the rest of it just has to happen. And keep in mind too, like none of that music, I didn't use any of that ever. Like any of those imitations, like that was all just kind of garbage that I made in college that I wouldn't really want to share with anybody now. But it was like, I don't know, I guess it's like a way into finding whatever it is I was actually going to do. Which, I mean, I certainly in the long run, I think probably that's still in writing that I do now, where I don't like to settle into one particular musical mode like that. I like being able to vacillate between, not necessarily know when it's going to switch and why, and kind of letting it be intuitive in a way where I don't really know what I'm doing, where I try not to really know what I'm doing. And if anything, that was like the time of life when I switched into writing music was after a few years of not really playing at all and just going to school. And I kind of wanted to rediscover playing guitar in particular, but in a way that was like not so technical, because I'd grown up very much studying jazz and you know, theory and stuff, and I wanted to get away from that because it felt kind of prescriptive and distracting. It's like kind of distracting to know too much of what your hands are doing. And that was part of my attraction to Nick Drake and the strange tunings was that it kind of jumbled everything up in a way where I didn't really know what I was doing. I kind of had to just follow my ear. And that way it led me towards just like, how do I just follow intuition really blindly and just trust that? And, you know, yeah, slowly over time, I think that's where I came to actually writing songs and developing my own vocabulary and just rolling with that. And, you know, kept that going as long as I could. Until I think I was able to keep that kind of like intuitive writing, non-questioning approach to making music until about the age of 30, at which point everything became constant interrogation of like, is this any good? What are you still doing and why are you still doing it? And that just keeps getting harder and harder and harder and harder.
I'm right there right now.
Oh, yeah, it sucks. It never ends. Well, maybe for some people it does, but for me it never ends. But
so speaking to your technical ability, I think one thing that people really gravitate towards is your picking style, or your chord progressions. What do you think in your development led to that particular style? Like, yeah, your picking style, your strumming, like, are there songs that you learned or things in jazz that really stuck with you that developed how you play today?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think one thing I can remember is trying to incorporate movement from classical music that I really liked, trying to incorporate that into my playing. Like I don't know if you know this composer, Olivier Messiaen. He's like this French composer. He was also like an ornithologist, bird enthusiast, crazy man that would like try to transcribe the calls of different birds and then orchestrate them into these wild. I remember when I was a kid, like trying to, play a version of them on guitar and then kind of slowly incorporating. And again, like when I was doing stuff like that, it was just out of interest. It was like, I love this music. I'm just going to figure out a way to play it somehow. And I think that is how a lot of my particular vocabulary, I guess, developed, was just when I was young, just appreciating stuff that I loved, and then it stuck with me, and then it just transitioned into something that I did professionally, and by that point it was like, well, this is what I got. This is what I collected. These are the little strains that I collected. But I mean, I think that's really, if anything, it was like that. It was collecting little bits of classical music in particular that I loved.
On that thread, Poinciana by Ahmad Jamal is one of yours and Chris Bear's favorite tunes.
Yeah.
I noticed a similarity in the drum beat for that song in What's Wrong by Grizzly Bear. Was that?
I mean, yes. I don't know. Bear, that's like one of those tunes that, it was like a touch point for us the whole time we were playing. Like I can't remember what other examples of songs like that there were, but that was one in particular that we talked about a lot and loved so much. I mean, I love that live record is so beautiful. It's like one of my favorite all-time records. But I mean, Sam, you can hear it in Southern Point too. Like the beginning of Southern Point, same thing. It's like basically the same feel. And we were always trying to figure out ways to incorporate that. But yeah, What's Wrong? Definitely based on that feel, at least at the end of the tune, right? Yeah, Poinciana is another one of those tunes. It's so straightforward, it's so simple, but there's so much space in it. There's so much kind of strange like mystery in that performance. And I kind of love that it's just this jazz trio playing for a bunch of people eating dinner in a hotel, basically, but like it has this really odd, kind of like off-putting, mysterious quality to it. And yeah, I think with something like What's Wrong, especially, like we were trying to dig into that really hard, like push that as far as we could.
Are you pretty aware? I mean, I know we talked about, quote unquote ripping off, or like, not putting out things that there's a connection to. Like, are you pretty aware of those things, and do you shy away from them, or was Poinciana like an exception because it's a drum beat? So
right, it's kind of a feel. I don't know. I think if anything, it's like, I think you can get really lost in worrying about, am I ripping someone off or am I not? I mean, it's hard to say. It's like something like Poinciana is like it's a reference point. It's like a type of feel. And it's not really, it's different to me than like ripping the song Poinciana off. It's more like, I mean, yes, it's definitely ripping the drum feel. There's no question about that. I guess it's like, I think you just trust that what you're going to make is valid within your own vocabulary somehow. And if you were just ripping people off, it would be obvious to everyone and would have no value whatsoever. So it's like, you kind of can't worry about that, because if that's all you're doing anyway, then it's probably not really worth anything. Again, this is where I often come back to this question of like, do you follow your intuition or are you really trying to make something that people will like?
Mhm.
And I think those are always in some kind of tension for a lot of people, especially if you're in a band and you're working with other people. You know, there's an inclination to try to repeat successes you had in the past that were pleasing to people, even if it's not what you're interested in now.
Right.
And I think especially when you start going down that alley of making music and writing songs, where you're like, how do we make something people are gonna like? Then you can get lost in these questions of like, what does this sound like? Does it sound like the right kind of thing? Are we ripping so and so off? Is this unique? Is it fresh? Is this a new, does this sound like something new from you, or does it just sound like you're repeating yourself? And I tend to fall on the side of like, you just shouldn't worry about those things at all.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're repeating yourself, maybe you're repeating yourself for a reason, and that actually shouldn't matter. You just have to like follow wherever your brain is taking you, and whatever you are naturally inclined to explore, that's what you should do, even if it's not interesting to other people or if it's not pleasing. And I don't know, when you think about writing from that side of things, like it doesn't really matter if you are, it matters if you're ripping someone off to the point where you're infringing on copyright.
Yeah.
But like, if you have incorporated something into what you make out of an enthusiasm and love of music, but it's obviously your own spirit and your own approach, then it doesn't really matter. It's like not even really something to worry about.
Sure. Yeah.
That
So
makes
yeah, definitely. So going down that path then of, writing for the public versus yourself,
sense.
obviously Grizzly Bear has immensely popular songs. How
Mhm.
has that affected, is that how you'd answer then that question of how it's affected your views on music? That it doesn't matter, write for yourself, not the public.
Well, I mean, there isn't a right answer to that.
Mhm.
Like I think, yeah, that was something that was like I wouldn't say it was an on-running debate exactly. It was just a point of creative tension, positive tension,
Mhm.
most of the time. And that band was like, as soon as we had released, Becatimist, and we had success with 2 weeks ago, it was a song that was popular. It's still pretty much the only song anybody outside of our fan base knows that we did. And
Yeah.
it's also very much an outlier. Like doesn't sound like a lot of our catalog. It doesn't have much relationship to a lot of music we made. And it was very much like, I was not a primary writer at all in that tune. But it was, it was kind of workshopped almost like an exercise of like, let's make something fun, which
Yeah.
is totally valid. And I think a lot of people write like that really well. And it is great if you can do that well and you can repeat that and you enjoy it. I don't see anything wrong with that whatsoever. But I always felt like, there was a certain strength that we had of just pursuing whatever strange ideas we could find and not question it and not really worry about what other people thought, or even, yeah, or not worrying about whether it was going to have lots of listens on Spotify or whatever the fuck else.
Yeah.
But it was very hard. I think after we had the success of one tune like that, it was very hard to escape. Like, can we do this again? Like, can we have another song that is popular in that way? And then you get down, you start going down this rabbit hole of like almost like boardroom style songwriting, where it's like, let's just try to craft something, that's really appealing. And I don't know, I still think it's valid because, again, like a lot of our most popular tunes were still those songs. So like, I always got hung up on this question of like, is a song valid if it doesn't really mean something to you personally? Like, how much does it matter if you have this intense connection to what you're writing? And the answer can definitely be like, it doesn't matter at all. And like, I think at times our career proved that like things that I felt really close to, like, didn't mean anything to people.
Mhm.
Some of them did, some of them didn't. But it was like, I got hung up on this idea that if I'm going to pursue music, if I'm going to pursue songwriting, like it should mean something to me personally. It should mean something to us, regardless of whether people like it or not.
Mhm.
And it was very hard to keep focused on that. And it was also it's like not an argument I could ever win because I was proven wrong over and over again. I think I still like to think that some of our most memorable songs like were both appealing, but also had this kind of internal narrative and strength in that way.
Yeah, or mysticism, as you've mentioned in the past.
Yeah, and like obviously there are certain fans that really get into that side of our records and also my records that are, you know, kind of pursuing almost like a not a well, not I don't want to say like a transcendent experience, but like music is like an access to some kind of magic. It's like always more interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're always trying to write like that, first of all, you come off like a self-righteous idiot a lot of the time. And also you end up making a lot of stuff that people don't like. Like some of it's great and some of it's not, and it's very hit or miss. But yes, I would say within the band, like it was hard to escape the question of like, can we make something really likable again? And we kind of kept pushing further, I would say. Like Shields was like a breaking point of that question, where it's like it both has like some of the weirdest stuff we've ever done, and it also has these like attempts at recreating like songs could get on the radio, you know. It was like both poles were very much present. And after that record, I don't know, it kind of, I wouldn't say it broke us exactly, but it was very hard to come back from that because I kind of ran away very much to this place of like, if I'm going to write at all, it has to really mean something to me. Otherwise, I'm just not going to do anything.
Yeah.
I kind of just bailed on making music for a few years. And I don't know. Yeah, the last Grizzly Bear record was very much like, let's just try to make something that we can all enjoy and hopefully other people enjoy. And that's it. And whether it's successful or not, I don't know, but it kind of ended our ability to kind of work intuitively with each other in a way that I felt that I could connect with. Yeah, so I don't know. It's funny. It's like I still struggle, and now I'm in this place where I'm still trying to write it. I'm still trying to finish a record, and it's been really hard. And it's been years of kind of struggling with this material and throwing it away. And I kind of feel like I'm writing in a void now that I don't have a band to answer to, and that's really hard in another way. But yeah, it's like in some ways that question of like, how much does it matter if your songs mean something to you versus are they just appealing to other people and that's the only meaning that is valid? Like that question kind of did like shake me in a way where it broke my ability to have like an unwavering sense of confidence in what I was doing, that it does matter. If it matters to me or it matters to anybody else, or that it's, you know, just a waste of time. Anyway, and especially now in like the pandemic times, like it's very easy to feel like what I do is a waste of everyone's time. And I should just be helping people. Shouldn't be sitting here in my studio like trying to do anything. And for the last couple of months, I haven't done much of anything.
Well, okay, so then getting more granular, collaborating with Grizzly Bear versus working on your own. You mentioned on the one hand with Grizzly Bear, you know, there's these maybe restrictions where they're like, oh, let's try to replicate this, or those kinds of constraints to an extent, versus on your own where there's the troubles of like, is this worth it? You know, I have to motivate myself, that kind of thing. So what are the values in both that you find?
Well, I mean, you know, when being in a band really worked, it was like the most ideal thing I could ever imagine in terms of making music. Having people to answer to in general is, I find, really valuable. I also really like being able to switch roles and kind of like sometimes be the central character and sometimes be the, you know, the central writer, and then sometimes just be someone that can shape things out and be helpful and, you know, be a good player and, you know, be a team player. Like being able to switch between those roles was amazing. I always loved that about that band when it was really working. That was a really great feeling. You know, feels good to be a part of something, helping people in some way, even if it's like that. You know, and yeah, having people to just be right there in front of you to be excited about whatever idea you are yourself developing, and having that support system to not only bounce ideas off of you, but to have them, bring in strange ideas that you never would have thought of on your own, but, can bring songs forward in ways that are totally unimaginable if you're writing alone. So I miss that a lot, to be honest. But, the advantage of, the advantage of writing alone is that you can pursue your own strange ideas to the absolute farthest degree. And you can like certain things I did, I guess, on that EP a long time ago, I was able to just leave the very first version of songs, and then that was what it was. Like, the song Say Nothing, I basically wrote the thing while recording it. It was like, I did a few takes of singing and playing piano at the same time, and like, that was the song. And then after that, I put, there was an arrangement, laid the arrangement on top of what the recording was, and that's it. And there was no discussion. There was no like, here's my song, let's talk about it. What do we have to do? It just was what it was. And that is that's very hard to pull off in a really collaborative band. Usually it's probably for the better that you can't do that I was not allowed to do that. It's probably for the better. But then there are certain times where I was really glad I was able to finish something without that filter and without the kind of like deliberation process. And like, I just kind of don't feel, there's no inherent feeling of like, yeah, this is really going to mean something to people. I'm just like, I don't know how I'm doing anymore. And, if I had a band to answer to, if we had a timeline to work with, if we had each other to riff off of, I'm sure it would be hugely helpful. And yeah, not having that is super hard. It's kind of baffling. I'm getting there anyway. I'm gonna get somewhere, but
I know there's no surefire like method or process to creating music. So I'll list a few songs of yours, and if you could just give, a little story of how they came about, how you wrote them, like.
Sure.
So Golden Mile.
Let's see. How was that written? Well, I was living upstate. We had moved out of Brooklyn. We moved out of Brooklyn with my girlfriend. We were living way upstate, middle of nowhere. How did that song come about? Which part of it? Like the lyric or just the... I honestly don't quite remember where the music part came from. I was just playing guitar all the time. But I very much associate it with it, that time in life of like kind of running away from a sense of home, a sense of place in the city. I think that was kind of like, if anything, that was like a song very much set in isolation in upstate and kind of trying to run away from life. And there's kind of, even in the silence of upstate, even in quiet, kind of beautiful setting there was no real escape from kind of just falling apart, to be quite honest. And if anything, that's what that song brings to mind.
The progression itself, and it really speaks to your classical influences, the movements, like the way you walk up to that landing, C chord. I know you're using a capo, but the C form, like, it has this very classical influence to it. I can't explain it, but when you wrote that song, do you recall like how that progression came about at all, or the picking for it?
I kind of do. But that was one of those things that was like a few different tunes. Like, I think there were a few different songs that I had kind of running at the same time, and they never quite worked as they were by themselves. Mm-hmm. And then by kind of, they eventually bled together into one tune, and that's what that song was. I'm not actually sure what piece of, I'm trying to like, I can't picture what you're talking about. Like what section are you talking about? I'm like, I'll figure it out.
Yeah, when you're landing on the main line,
So like, right.
that has a very like classical type of motif to it.
That thing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like there's a certain point where you're just playing whatever it is I find that after a number of years, I just developed a vocabulary that didn't feel external to me. Like it just was kind of like, I don't know, these are the progressions that I'm working with.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there was a long period like in that couple of years I was like listening to a lot of blues, and I really wanted to I knew that it was a bad idea, but I kind of wanted to figure out like, how do I play the blues in a way that's like in my world, like my musical worldview. So there was like a lot of like that whole thing was like definitely, I'm just trying to play a blues line. But you know, I wanted to figure out a way that it wasn't clownish, sort of ridiculous. So there were like I did record things that were like absolutely just embarrassing, silly when you're doing like bad blues tunes because it felt good. And I think that was like I landed on that as like, okay, this feels like something more than just, you know, white man approaching 30 trying to play the blues. The most heinous thing I could have ever done. So I mean, if anything, it's that, you know.
Okay.
If anything, it's like I kind of always used to have, I guess I still do now, but it's like I'll have all these little threads of progressions that I've come up with that just float around for years sometimes, just that aren't songs. They're just like, there's this little bit that I've been working on, but I'm sitting in my living room and I'll play it again, and eventually it clicks with something else. And Golden Mile was definitely one of those tunes where it's like, these three pieces suddenly fit together, you know.
Gotcha. How about Sleeping You?
How did that one come together?
It's in an interesting tuning for
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a funny tuning that I was using a lot then. Again, it's just like one of those. There was a time where I kind of left everything tuned like that for a couple months and would just play whatever. And I think that tune especially, I mean, until you get to the end, like that tune was entirely just an instrumental thing for a long time. Like it was just something that I played a lot around the house. And from the same time of writing as Golden Mile, like actually that vocal is it is kind of like almost like a blues kind of melody, to be honest. Like it came from that same period of writing, I guess. But of course, it's set on that strange tuning and strange chord progression that really isn't particularly the blues. Although now that I think about it, I mean, it kind of is. It's like it is kind of just once you get past the instrumental part, verses are basically what 4/1, 4/5/2 or something. It's like almost the blues.
How did you land on that tuning? Is it just arbitrary, or did you see it somewhere?
No, it was just I didn't see it anywhere. I don't know. I used to just change tunings around. I think it's almost the same tunings fine from now, which is something I did a lot.
Mm.
Like often it would be something like I picked up a guitar and it was just tuned wrong, and then I would leave it how it was. I think that's how I came across the tuning for Fine for Now, which is very close to that one. It was like at somebody's house, and their guitar was just tuned wrong, and I just thought it was interesting. And like that's going back to like the Nick Drake thing, like especially from that age on, I kind of liked the idea of playing music not by anything other than just like pleasing shapes. Like it's almost like it's like physically pleasing to operate in the shapes that you have to use to play in that tuning. So, and you just kind of find these funny little forms, and you follow them wherever they go. And like I think the tuning of Sleeping Mute is kind of like that too,
Gotcha.
because it's not, there's not a lot of like complex movement at all on the left hand. It's mostly just guided by what the tuning was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, let's bring it back to Sailing by Night.
Yeah. Woofda. God, hard to remember. Well, Fred, that was when Fred and I were goofed around. He wrote most of that lyric. I didn't really write lyrics then. I basically just came up with, I left on a whim, clean up the kitchen, I think, which doesn't make any sense. But yeah, the chord progression, I mean, that was probably like the first attempt at like a serious song that we ever did, or a serious song that I played for anyone in public anyway. And certainly for Fred and I, it was like our first attempt at not just making like bizarre, goofy beats, which is all we did before that point. I don't know. I hardly remember what the origin of that was anymore.
Let's go down that road of your work with men. I mean, no, I mean that's an interesting anecdote. Is I saw Golden Suits when they went on that one tour, and I was not aware that. I mean, I don't know to what extent I'll say he wrote, but that he wrote "No One Does It Like You," for example. I had no idea, and he caught my surprise, and I was, just because you were singing it, So, yeah. How was that dynamic? How'd you guys work in that sense?
I mean, that era was so fun. Yeah, I mean, he wrote like the majority. The demo of that song was Fred, but it was this kind of fun. We had like a really fluid back and forth thing at that time. It was really cool. But like, yeah, he would basically come up with a song like that, and I, basically came up with the whole feel for it, and then added a bridge to it, and then like the form, like developed the form, and then developed like the whole style of the thing. And yeah, it was just it was just a lot of fun, and that was all the same time that like Chris and I were working so fluidly and easily too on just arranging stuff and riffing things out together and not really questioning anything. So that whole Inner Park record was very much like Fred did a ton of writing, which he does not get acknowledged for a lot, and we don't. I guess I don't do a lot of interviews, but I try to talk about it when I can and pointing out the things that he contributed to, which wasn't the whole record, but it was a lot of like songs like that, or like Teenagers, or Classical Records, or a lot of the songs people love on that record are things that he basically wrote, or while young, he wrote the majority of that tune. But it was really, working with Fred was always really fun because he was extremely open to like any strange musical ideas I had. He was pretty willing to just let me run with whatever that was. And he was really developing, I feel like at that time, as a lyricist in a very particular way that I could never do. It was very foreign to me. And I think that's why a lot of those songs clicked really well with us, was like I was able to kind of live in my strengths as just like pursue strange arrangement ideas and sing however I wanted, and he was able to basically just be much more purely like a writer, especially from a lyrical perspective. And we met together in these ways where like we were able to riff off each other's strengths, and build something that we could never do on our own.
One thing I asked him was what he learned most from you in terms of working with you, and again, you can confirm to what extent this is true, but he said that you either work to or won't give someone just a C chord, a plain C chord, or you won't, to an extent, ever give just a C, D minor, G, F type of progression. Noting how you said, you gave No One Doesn't Like You a vibe, or even in covers, you definitely adapt to the chords a lot. Like, how
Mhm.
how do you interpret that? Or is that true? Like, do you sit and you think like instead of a C chord, I'm gonna give them an add nine. I'm gonna give them a sharp five.
Um, I don't know. I guess I don't really think about it quite like that. I mean, it's more like I'm not trying to be like intentionally obtuse or something. It's more like I follow whatever voicings are pleasing to me, and I guess I tend to like stranger voicings of chords. Um, I tend to like things that don't sound like they should have been written on the guitar, but then that's what I'm playing. So, like, I was never that attracted to like pure folk playing on a guitar as it is. Um, Honestly, I think it's a real skill. If you can write really simply, make great songs with like the simplest chords, I think
Mhm.
that's an incredible skill, and I think it's a skill that I don't have, to be honest. And I think that's why it's enjoyable to cover. Like covering like Deep Blue Sea, it's like there's nothing fancy in that. I mean, it's just an old folk ballad. Like
Too little, too late.
before. Well, that is the opposite. That was like I'm just going to make this as silly as possible. But yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I do think there's a perception that I'm like trying to be difficult sometimes, or like just come up with the strangest progression I can, and then like figure out a way to like I don't know, like squeeze a melody out of it, and like that's never really been how I've operated. It's I don't know. I guess I've just always been attracted to progressions that just sound out like they're outside of pop music, like they don't belong there a little bit. Um,
It's clear you have the vocabulary as well. So, if it's in your wheelhouse.
a little bit, yeah. Um, Less so as time goes on, but yeah.
So I'm sure people would expect to hear questions about songs like 2 Weeks or $40 Rug, but for
Rug is very much a Fred. That is a Fred Enterprise. I'm just a hype man on that song. I'm just in the
gotcha,
back.
but
Yeah.
for what it's worth, I truly think some of your best tunes
Mhm.
weren't even released in album or EP capacity, like Not Coming Back, like You'll Never Know.
But if you all look away, you'll never know how far we've
um,
come.
or Untitled December 2009.
You can refuse me, but you can't just turn me away.
What led to those not being pushed out there or given that treatment?
Well, maybe in some ways it was just a mistake. Uh, Something like "You'll Never Know," which I don't even know what recording of that even exists.
It's just live videos.
Like stuff, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, that was something that I worked on before the DOE tour happened, and it was I think we kind of expected that we were going to jump into some version of another record, and then it
Mhm.
just never happened. Um, Not coming back. I mean, we tried to work on that for Shields, to be honest, but it was not appealing to. That was a tune that was like the rest, as I recall. They might contest this, but as I recall, there was worry that it kind of felt too much like I was repeating myself. Like it didn't sound new, didn't seem novel enough. It did so that there was a real desire to change it drastically or just not use it. But I kind of didn't want to mess with it too much.
Yeah.
So then it ended up just being the demo that I submitted is what I ended up releasing. Probably should have you done something with that, honestly, like it probably should have just been on the EP. Um, Maybe I thought I was saving it for a full length and then I just never finished one, to be quite honest. But at the time, it felt like I gave that Untitled 2009 song. I think at the time I felt like it was just too tender or something. Like it was too, I don't know, it didn't fit with other material or something. It felt too felt too tender to be taken seriously, which is stupid. Like that's often like the kinds of things people really love, is when you're being really generous with your, I don't know, or how you're expressing whatever it is you're feeling. Like just being open is valuable. I don't know why I decided against that, but yeah, I ended up giving away, like Not Coming Back and Untitled, whatever that song is. Like I put those up on SoundCloud at the same time in 2012 while we were on tour for Shields, and I just kind of like gave them away.
Yeah.
Gift to people, which seemed really nice at the time, and people seemed to really appreciate it. Now seems like a huge mistake, because it's like, well, I never even there's no proper release of them. They're not streamable. They're just like songs that I just gave away.
Yeah.
I actually have been regretting it recently.
Oh, I'm sorry if it brings up
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. It's nice to be able to like share music in an unfiltered way like that. It's cool. Like it was a nice experience. But then I also feel like I need to finish a damn record, so I can't just give more stuff away. But I also kind of wish I could. You know, there's something very satisfying about how direct that is.
Those songs definitely speak to what you were speaking on earlier of, it seems like you wrote them for yourself and they weren't for the public, and they have this sentimental feeling to them, this very intimate feeling to them. So,
right.
As much as they could have been written and produced the way a Grizzly Bear song was, or Department of Eagles, it's maybe they fill their own niche in what your goal is in that sense,
Right. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, if anything, I kind of wish I could just make a whole record that felt like that, which is not, it's like not really something I want to listen to, but I think it would be meaningful. It would be like, if I could find some way to bridge that, like making things that are generous, that are like emotionally generous, that maybe make me a little bit uncomfortable, but clearly mean something to other people. It's like hard to know. It seems like that's one of those things that is a strength that I don't acknowledge as a strength or something. Like I don't think of it as one of my strengths as a musician, but those tend to be the things that work the best. So I should try to learn how to lean into that, I guess, in the time I have left to write music.
Well, let's round this out with those couple of excerpts from your recent post. I'll quote: "Keeping the format simple means that I have no choice but to hone in on essential elements. I like to avoid the trap of production as a fix for substantial failures in performance and writing." So could you elaborate on that thought and what led you to this notion?
Well, I think it's kind of a reaction against maybe my last experience making the record in some ways, which was very much a kind of like boardroom deliberation of all the elements of every song, rewrite the lyrics 10 times style of making music, which again can be great and can result in things people love, but I didn't really, it felt like a lot of fixing. It was like fixing. Everything was a demo to be fixed. And it's kind of exasperating and some kind of dispiriting way to work on music, just to feel like you got this initial thread of an idea and it just needs to be like gussied up and turned into something valid, rather than like, how do we just take what this thing is and take its essential quality and just emphasize that as much as possible. So anyway, I mean, I am now at a place where like I don't have, the only gear I have at home to work with is a couple acoustic guitars, a keyboard, and it's like I have no choice but to focus on these really essential elements, and it's been very challenging, especially at this phase of life, as I was saying, like the amount of like sort of constant interrogation of my own ideas and questioning whether any of it's valid. It's made very clear to me when I'm just playing them on these very simple instruments. And yeah, you kind of have to tighten things up enough that they function without any effects or any extra production, or, you know, there's no holes to be filled by like, let's come up with a random synth line. It's just kind of like all that you have is the pure substance of what you're making on the instrument, and that's it. And you know, it feels like a goal. It's a goal that I have to finish a record like that. I don't know that it's going to be good, and I don't know that it will be better than making music the other way. I just felt like I needed to go all the way in the other direction from where I had just come from, and try to make things like with the most essential parts in mind, and to see where that led me. Thus far, it's led me to working on a record for 5 years. So
It'll be 5 times that much greater.
probably not, but it'll be what it is.
So how do you push through those feelings, you know, of when you note like substantial failures in performance and writing? Like, is a failure maybe a part in a song that makes you cringe, or you're not confident in, or what are these failures in writing?
That's probably, you know, you're pointing out maybe that was an unfortunate way to even phrase that. It sounds very severe or something.
For sure. It's relative.
There are no failures in writing. There are many right answers. I don't know. I mean, I think I'm trying to work on only ideas that feel like they have some essential quality that it feels like it's already there in some way. That doesn't mean the song is done. It's just like, I don't want to have bits of things that I'm just like filling in. I don't want to be filling in holes and being like, you know, I've got a beat, I just need a guitar part. Like, I don't want it to, that's kind of what I mean. Like, I don't want to just be constructing or like contriving music for the sake of finishing a record. It just seems like a waste of time. And if that's what I end up doing, then I don't want to make records anymore. It just feels like I should just quit at that point.
Yeah.
So it's more like, if I'm going to finish something, I want every one of the songs to have an essential quality that feels like the song needs to exist in my life and hopefully in the world. I mean, it's like, how do you fix substantial failures in writing? I mean, I think you probably don't. I mean, the way I generally fix it is I bail on whatever the idea is. I fix it by throwing it away. And like, again, probably not the best thing for most people to do. Like, you probably shouldn't do that, but that's just where I am now in this time of life. Is like, you know, it feels like the only way to get to the finish line when I'm sort of operating in the void that I'm operating in by, you know, writing alone.
So the other excerpt I wanted to hit on was, and again, I'll quote, "All I want at this point is to finish something that captures what obsessed me about music when I was young. The right chord movement can seem to flip switches in the brain." It elaborates, it goes on to say, "I think there's something still there to be found." What goes into that kind of search, or how do you actively search for that kind of aspect or element in music?
I don't know. I think it has to kind of find you. I mean, I guess I just meant like I think that's what attracted me to making music in the first place when I was a kid. Yeah, it was just these ways, like the way that certain little turns of phrase or movements within songs or pieces of music could just kind of like trigger these very unintentional experiences, or like almost like visions, or, you know, there's something very mysterious about the way music works on your mind, and I don't think there's any intentional way to unlock that. I think it's just a matter of like following your hands where they go and following your ears and following what sounds. I don't even know. It's very hard to answer. I don't know. It's like trying to get back to the initial inspiration that drew me into music in the first place. And I think over time, over years of interacting with, you know, music industry and performing and having a body of work that you have to live up to, or you have to run away from, or you have to replicate, or it can't be too similar, this, that, and the other. It's like, how do I get back to just the thing that in the very first place really drew me to music and why it was so appealing, why it was so kind of life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way I pursued that when I was young was by just avidly listening to music. And like the line between listening and writing was very vague. It was like, I'm just trying to enjoy this and find some kind of escape from the rest of life. And, you know, playing guitar and writing songs was, always interacting with just whatever it is I'm listening to and enjoying right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's aspirational. I don't know how to get back to that, honestly. It's like, I think that's why it's like, it's the only goal I have left, because I kind of feel like pursuing a career doing what I do at this point feels a little silly, almost like, it seems like a long shot. So it has to just be of value to me in my life. And it's been hard to find in the last few years. So if anything, like working on the record I'm working on now is an attempt to find that feeling again. I guess that's kind of what I meant. That's not exactly an answer to your question, but I'm kind of riffing off to the side with it. But if you want to refocus that question.
Is there music you're currently obsessing over, or is maybe giving you that kind of feeling now?
I mean, recently, one record I really spent a lot of time with is this record. I don't know, do you know who Egberto Gismonti is? He's like this Brazilian writer. I don't know how I came across, he's very well known in Brazil, and whatever, people love him. I didn't know who he was, but I just came across this record of his on YouTube, of all places, because it's not on Spotify, it's not streaming, but it's a record called Agua e Vinho. And it's just like this really odd, it has no real clear genre. Like, he's very much a jazz guy, and I think he ended up just making very like out there kind of, it's just strange stuff when he was older. But this was a record he made when he was younger that it just kind of feels like it has no clear intention of like what it's trying to be or what genre it's supposed to be in, or it doesn't matter. It was like it was something like 1970, and nobody really cared, especially in Brazil. But I spent a lot of time with that record, just kind of obsessing over the, I don't know, strangeness. It has no real sense of place to me. Probably because I just don't have the context of the time. I don't have the context of the culture he was living through. But to me, it just is like an extremely uniquely weird record that I've never really heard anything quite like it. I don't know. I spent a lot of time listening to Baden Powell, who's another Brazilian guitar player, who's much more straight ahead, but he's just one of these characters that, like, his claim to fame is very much his craft as a player, but there's so much kind of soul within the craft of his playing. It feels like an approach to making music that I can't really think of a lot of examples of it now. I don't know what a current equivalent of that would be, but it kind of reminds me of what I loved about jazz when I was a kid, but it's much more strict and kind of like formalistic playing. There's a real the parameters of what he plays is a lot more strict. It's a lot more particular. But that's not really even a songwriting thing. That's just like a kind of that kind of craftsmanship and like soul with finding soul within the craft.
Yeah.
Of playing is like, and it's still an interesting thing to me. It's a very dated idea about music, and very much not the way I think most people approach making records anymore, because it has nothing to do with like, there's no external narrative, there's no persona there really. It's just purely sound of the thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever, try to figure out what they're doing on guitar, or to this day, do you practice or do a cover just to see what's going on?
Every now and again, I still do that. I don't do it that much. I probably should do that more. I probably will learn something. I've done that a little bit in recent years, but no, I mean, at this point, it's like I find so little time to really just play music in general in my day-to-day life that I think when I do, it's like all I have time for is to work on whatever ideas I have going. So it almost feels like it would be a waste of everyone's time if I sat around like covering, trying to learn Baden Powell parts in my bedroom like I did when I was a teenager or something.
Well, I mean, David Bowie, it's noted in a creativity book that before any record he would make, he'd go to record stores, buy a ton of records and just a ton of music. So whenever he was stuck, he had a reference point. He could say, oh, we could arrange it like this. We can. So
Right.
that's something that you do at all, or do you try not to listen to music when you're writing?
I wouldn't say I try not to. I mean, I don't really work like that. I mean, Bowie is interesting because he's almost like, he kind of had the mind of a producer as well in that way, where he was always taking in little pieces of whatever was going on around him. Like he was totally a sponge. And also Bowie's own, his own persona and his writing was very much his own, but he definitely was, leeching off the ideas of everyone around him in a beautiful way. But it was very much like, yeah, kind of like a producer way of thinking about making music. Um, I don't think I really work well like that.
You called it research. So would you view it as such, like listening to a ton of music and or like the Brazilian artists you mentioned, like when you're
Sure.
listening, you're absorbing, right?
I mean, this is the trouble with when music becomes a profession. Is it's like nothing can ever just be like, do I enjoy this thing purely for what it is? And like, I kind of hate that about being having any kind of career at all. Is that like, you can't just go through life like, am I enjoying this day right now? Like, what does this day just mean to me in my life? Like, everything has to feed into, is this something I can write about? Like, is this substance for my art? And it's so stupid because there's a lot of times where like, whatever you're living through or whatever you're listening to, there's nothing to say about it, or there's nothing to say about it that has to mean anything to anybody else. And I think that's what I don't like about it. I think, again, like some people, I think, especially from a more like producerial standpoint, I think being able to look at all the music that's happening right now is like a kind of research. And like, how do I incorporate these ideas, or how do I riff off them? Is I think a very valuable thing for a lot of people, but I think just because I prefer the idea that, music is just something that's part of my life, and it's something that I want to just enjoy and find a way to express ideas through. Like, I don't really want to think of listening to music as research. Like, I'd rather it just is incorporated into what I'm doing naturally. And maybe it's hard to do, I guess, but yeah. Sorry, just kind of, my brain just kind of stalled out.
That's the very last question, and I'll make it something that's just simple.
Mhm.
What song of yours, whether it's been in Grizzly Bear, Department of Eagles, your solo stuff, what song of yours do you think is representative, or are you most proud of your work?
I don't know. I guess within Grizzly Bear, like something like Sleeping Beaut is probably up there. I still really enjoy that song, which I can't say for a lot of my own songs. Like it's hard to enjoy them for me in the long run. But that's still one that I really enjoy playing. I still think it sounds special. Really meant something to me at the time, and felt very vital at the time, and it still feels kind of vital now. I don't know. I'd like to think that's representative in a way. It incorporates a lot of the kind of strange choral stuff I've done, and it was a really great time working on that with the band. We had a lot of fun making it. Like it was such a blast working with those guys to accomplish the thing. Like it just felt like You know, so it's like a lot of high fives, kind of making a song like that with those guys, and it was great. It's just like it's such an ideal experience of making music from the whole, you know, from writing the thing to recording it was so great, and then performing it was always really fun. Like that was one of the most enjoyable songs we could perform. I've found like there's just always so much energy in it. So I don't know. Again, I guess that's not exactly like I don't know how well that song really stands on its own as writing. Like I've only performed it totally alone once, and I don't know that it really works like that. So maybe that means it's not an example of great songwriting. I don't really know, but it's certainly feels like an accomplishment that I still feel proud of it. And
Well,
there's other things too that are, I guess, like different types of writing, but I don't know. Leave it there. Leave it to that one. What do you think? What's the right answer? What should I say?
no, I mean, again, you really prefaced, you know, you want it to feel something. So in spite of it being able to stand on its own or how it came about, like you said, like when you performed it, it got a reaction or you felt something, or in the making of it, you know, there was energy there. So that speaks to, you know, that song was written well because it was written in good conditions, or it provides good conditions, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, it feels like one of those songs where like everybody wins.
Yeah.
Everyone seemed to enjoy it, including me. So I guess it works. It doesn't always work like that. So yeah.
I'll let you get back to life, and I hope your family's doing well and you are too. And again, I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks. I hope you're doing well as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.